Hello, I'm Stephen Mayer, and I'm from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and I'd like to discuss with you ecological principles for assessment and management of cumulative effects. There are numerous definitions for cumulative effects, but I'll give you two. First, changes to the environment that are caused by an action in combination with other past, present, and future human actions. Second, synergistic, interactive, or unpredictable outcomes of multiple land use practices or development projects that aggregate over time and space and that result in significant consequences for people and the environment. And I would maybe extend this to thinking about multiple natural and anthropogenic disturbances in conjunction with climate change, because human disturbances don't operate in isolation and may simply contribute to additional disturbance and stress on a landscape. So why should landscape ecologists study cumulative effects? Well, it's a way of understanding ecological and socioeconomic outcomes of our actions and decisions, given the changing environment and complex interactions between natural and human systems. So it inherently involves the things that we really already care about, the broad spatial scales, the long time frames, and multiple stressors. Further, it provides us a way to understand alternative outcomes, alternative futures, and prepare resource managers to facilitate economic activity while conserving our natural heritage. So the assessment and mitigation of cumulative effects is something that's increasingly considered in the management of North American landscapes. And it kind of arose out of the environmental impact assessment process, maybe more so than ecology, but it can require the consideration of environmental impacts beyond those of the individual projects under consideration. So thinking about the broader region. And but there hasn't really been the strongest theoretical underpinning to it. And what I'd like to do in this talk is start to put some meat on the bones there and suggest some of the theory in ecology and landscape ecology that may apply. Concepts that are important for the management of cumulative effects include the idea of multiple stressors, so that you can have multiple variables due to human activities that really exceed the normal range of variation. Or the feedbacks are really important in cumulative effects. So whether they're synergistic or antagonistic, this idea that you can have multiple stressors adding up to greater than the sum of their parts. Resistance and resilience, I'll talk about in a moment. The identification of appropriate scales of analysis. It's really core to this idea of cumulative effects. And concepts that are really core to landscape ecology include pattern process relationships. So we can ask things like, how do harvest landscape patterns influence the spread of insects or fire? Hierarchy theory, so the organization of nature. Can this be used to understand the correct skills for assessment and analysis? The idea of coupled ecological social dynamics, so the trade-offs between the environment and the economy, or identifying valued ecosystem components. The concept of sustainability, so can optimal sustainable landscape patterns be identified to target harvesting, for example? The concept of scale, so things like the measurement resolution and extent, patch sizes, the cross-scale linkages between human and natural systems, heterogeneity, as an indicator of biodiversity or as a way to define assessment regions, for example. Landscape connectivity. Can it be used as a valued ecosystem component? Can it be used as a candidate for establishing ecological thresholds? The concepts of resistance and resilience are really critical to cumulative effects. So resistance being this ability to remain unchanged given stressors or disturbance. Resilience being the ability to bounce back, to quickly recover given disturbances or stress. And the related concept of adaptive capacity, so the extent to which a species, community, or ecosystem really has the ability to persist over time given stressors, given disturbance, given change, and to respond positively to these as opportunities. Thresholds are critical to the assessment of cumulative effects. They're often used as standards. Thresholds are rooted in ecological resilience theory. They're this point at which the ecosystem shifts to an alternative stable state. You can think of the kelp forest sea urchin system. But thresholds are often difficult to detect before reaching that tipping point. In particular, thresholds are also not always characteristic of ecosystem change, which can be more gradual, such as continuous compositional shifts along ecotones. And so we really need to distinguish between ecological thresholds, which shift between these stable states, and management thresholds, which are really these limits of acceptable change. Complex systems theory can also inform cumulative effects. So the idea of emergence, for example, where local scale events can have system-wide consequences, or discontinuity ideas around gaps and aggregations, or nonlinear dynamics, which we've talked about a bit. Tools to apply might include population viability analysis, so that process to determine the probability that population will go extinct within a given time frame, or the very old concept of maximum sustainable yield, so the max growth rate we can sustain by harvesting surplus individuals. Whatever kinds of cumulative effects management or assessment might be undertaken, though, it should be part of an adaptive management framework where whatever the results are, that management activities are continually adjusted and new policies developed based on the findings of previous management activities. Wherever possible, cumulative effects research should test theories. So, for example, the stress gradient hypothesis. So this idea that competition prevails in undisturbed or productive environments, while facilitation prevails in disturbed environments. Or the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, where you get the highest species richness at intermediate levels of disturbance. The textural discontinuity hypothesis, so this idea that animals have physical and behavioral characteristics to exploit environmental texture at particular scales. Patch dynamics or succession theory. These are things that can be part of a management framework so that we can learn about the generality of these ideas while managing the landscape. Because ecological communities can vary with disturbance, perhaps we can use the distribution of life history strategies, for example, to help quantify the cumulative disturbance, cumulative ecosystem effects of anthropogenic projects and natural disturbances in conjunction. Whatever ecological variable we're testing for change, we often need to compare it to some sort of baseline. So that may be more natural areas, protected areas, but we have that danger of shifting baselines as anthropogenic change creeps increasingly across generations. And so often the solution to that is to look at historic or natural ranges of variability, for example, in fire regimes or other natural disturbance regimes, and compare anthropogenic disturbances to properties of past change or natural change. So some final thoughts. Cumulative effects management really should be testing ideas wherever it can in an adaptive management framework. It should be considering not just multiple projects, but also natural disturbance along with climate change. We really need to be thinking about how to integrate social and economic systems with ecological systems. And also, I hope I've shown that ecology can offer a theoretical grounding to cumulative effects management, but really we need to be going farther in offering objective guidance on the limits to development, not just detecting change. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.